I bought this island with the hardest-earned money I've ever made. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't an inheritance. It wasn't luck. It was really hard work. I wanted to get away from the noise of the city, the traffic whistles, the neighbors barbecuing to bad music on Sunday mornings at 7 a.m. I bought the island for peace, shade, and coconut water. Literally. I even had a name for it. Isolandia. Cheesy? Maybe. But it was mine. For the first few months, everything was perfect. I woke up to the sound of the sea, made my coffee watching the dolphins. Yes, there were dolphins. And yes, they're angry now too. Planted my own little things. Hiked barefoot. A private paradise, where you couldn't even get a cell phone signal. Until she arrived. The woman appeared as if she wanted nothing. The first time I saw her, she was in a white speedboat, wearing a hat so big it looked like a satellite dish. She greeted me from afar, smiling as if she were my childhood friend. I, in the innocence of someone who still believes that people with easy smiles only mean well, waved back. I should have thrown myself into the water and swum to the mainland at that moment. The next day, when I left the house, there was a pickup truck parked on the island's main trail. That's right, pickup truck. On an island. How did it get there? I also wondered. In the body, boxes and boxes with solar technology. The future is now stickers. I stared at them with a questioning look on my face, wondering if they had mistaken the address. Spoiler, they hadn't. Out of nowhere, she appeared. She was wearing a beige vest, with a clipboard in her hand, and a smile that seemed to say, "I know what's best for you." She said she was from the HOA. Yes, HOA, Residents Association. As if a private island had neighbors. As if the concept of living in isolation included someone deciding the size of your lawn or the shade of your windows. She said that the island, being within the community's environmental perimeter, was part of the association's jurisdiction. And so a green energy transition project was being implemented. At the time, I laughed. I thought it was a prank. I looked around expecting a hidden camera, a drone, a reality TV producer emerging from the woods saying, "Prank of the sustainable future." But no one appeared. Just her, with her arms crossed and the look on her face of someone who wouldn't accept a no, even if the Pope told her to. It all went very quickly. In 3 days, my island became a construction site. The noise of screwdrivers, people walking around wearing hard hats, open boxes in the middle of the trail, where lizards and sloths used to pass. There was now plumbing, and what's worse, without me signing anything, no consultation, no contract, just because. I asked, "Don't you think that's illegal?" She shrugged. She said it was an intervention authorized by the Superior Environmental Council of the coastal region, something I didn't even know existed. She said that you should be grateful. I should be grateful. I should be grateful for losing my shade, my privacy, my peace, and also becoming an energy supplier for houses I don't even see on the island. On the 4th day, I started to lose my mind. First, because the sun was no longer coming into my living room. The panels were reflecting the light directly onto the glass of my house, turning my interior into an oven. Then, because the fauna disappeared. The birds, the lizards, even the crickets have gone. And finally, because tourists began to appear. Yes, tourists. The woman put the island on Google Maps as an ecological solar observation point. Some people came by kayak. Some brought a drone. One even pitched a tent near my vegetable garden. It got to the point where I could no longer walk around naked in my own house. And when that moment comes, you know your freedom is over. But I'm not one for shouting. I'm one for giving back in the same tone. I began to outline my plan in silence. Did she want sun? I was going to give her shade. Lots of it. But I wasn't going to plant just anything. I was going to build a forest, a wall of leaves, a green shield. I began to study fast-growing species, trees with wide canopies, plants that stick, climb. And while she celebrated energy production, I walked around the island with seeds in my pocket and anger in my heart. I was going to destroy that solar plant in the best nature takes revenge style, only with a lot of style. And you won't believe what happened next. I planted the first tree with the same energy as someone preparing a silent protest. It wasn't just a sapling, it was a manifesto. Every hole I dug was like an outburst, a green revenge being rooted in the heart of that island which, until recently, was mine alone, and which now looked like a solar panel parking lot overseen by a woman with an ego the size of a full moon. For the first few days, she didn't even notice. While her technicians were running around with tools, I was there, discreetly sticking the smartest botanical species into the ground. Trees that grow almost 5 centimeters a day, vines that climb up any structure and cling to it like an unresolved X. A strategic jungle, thought out, leaf by leaf. Almost an ecological chess game against the solar dictatorship that was taking over my landscape. And what about her? She was too busy taking selfies next to the panels, posting them on social media with captions like, "Sustainability is power," and "Revolutionizing the planet, one sun at a time." Meanwhile, I watched in silence, watering my green army with the same zeal as a father bathes his first child. Each new seedling that sprouted was like a middle finger planted towards her drawing board. The most incredible thing is how nature responds when it feels it's on the right side of the fight. The trees began to grow as if they had been summoned by a greater purpose. By the 7th day, some were already over the height of the technicians. By the 10th, they had branches partially shading the lower panels. It was almost poetic. While she was talking about clean energy, the sun simply began to hide behind my trees. And it wasn't by chance. She only realized what was happening when she took a group of tourists on an ecological tour with a lesson in sustainable energy. There she was, with her hat, her clipboard, and her speech ready, pointing at the panels as if she had discovered fire. Then someone raised their hand and asked, "Why are these panels here half covered by the trees?" Her face changed like curdled milk. The next day, she knocked on my door for the first time since it all started. I didn't even wait for her to open her mouth. I just pointed to the sign I'd made myself and stuck on the entrance to my house. Private property. Reforestation in progress. Sunshine inspectors prohibited. She took a deep breath, made that face that mixes contempt with indignation, and launched into the first and only conversation of the day. This is environmental sabotage. I stared. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to clap her hands for her ability to turn everything around. The woman had taken someone else's freedom, and she still wanted to pass herself off as an ecological victim. It was hard not to lose my head, but deep down, it was amusing to see the despair on the face of someone so used to controlling everything. She walked away muttering, perhaps believing she was dealing with a lunatic, and she was. Only a lunatic with a strategy. Because in the days that followed, the war became silent, but much more tense. Her technicians started discreetly pruning some branches. I thought it was hilarious. They thought it was an ordinary garden. Little did they know that the trees were growing with purpose, as if they understood that the enemy was there. The next day, the branches were bigger than before, as if nature was saying, "Try again, sucker." I had already installed automatic watering cans at strategic points, fertilized the soil with a special formula, and set up a small organic composting system. If she had solar technology, I had hate biotechnology, all in the name of shade. The most interesting thing was to see how the island began to transform. The birds came back. Fallen leaves began to accumulate under the panels. The soil became wetter, denser, more alive. It was as if nature had remembered who really owned that piece of paradise. But she didn't back down. She started sending letters. Yes, letters, as if she were a lady of feudal nobility. She called me an environmental obstructor, as if such a legal category existed. She claimed that I was jeopardizing a project in the public interest, even though it was on a private island that I had bought with my own money. In one of the letters, he threatened to report me for discouraging community energy production. It became a joke among the local fishermen. Every time they saw me, they asked if I had ever been arrested for planting too many trees. And it didn't stop there. At the height of her outburst, she had cameras installed. She placed poles with light sensors in the middle of the island. Yes, poles. In the middle of the island, in the middle of the ocean. A sort of solar Big Brother, where the only crime was producing too much shade. That's when I decided I needed to take things to another level. Shade wasn't enough. I needed natural sabotage. And that's when I discovered the secret weapon: banyan trees. Trees that grow as if they were alien invaders, with aerial roots, huge branches, and an infinite thirst for space. I planted 3 near the center of the installation. 2 weeks later, the branches were already caressing the panels with the delicacy of an irritated mother pulling her child's ear. And the most beautiful thing was to see that, little by little, the sound of the island was changing. Before, it was the constant hum of the panels, a mechanical noise that seemed to suck the soul out of the landscape. Now, it was the sound of the leaves, the wind and animals coming back. It was as if the planet was resetting her megalomaniac project. Of course, she freaked out. She started showing up with people in suits, taking photos, measuring things, threatening. But nobody wanted to buy the idea of cutting down a tree on a private island in the name of community solar efficiency. Even the technicians began to disappear. The few that were left walked around with their heads down, stumbling over roots, running away from insects. One of them looked at me and said, "I just wanted to install a solar panel, not fight with an enchanted forest." Everything was starting to make sense. Everything was in place. The island was alive again, pulsating. But the woman hadn't given up yet, and what she did afterwards exceeded all possible limits of sanity. But that's for the next chapter. Her plan was sinking faster than a capsized kayak at high tide. The island, once covered in plaques glistening in the sun, was now an opera of nature. The banyan trees advanced as if they had been trained by generals. Each root that rose was like a middle finger pointing to the sky, and each new shadow that formed drew a deeper sigh from the woman. She began to move around the island like a store manager being told that the customer isn't going to pay. Tense, walking fast, dropping loose phrases to no one in particular. It was a mixture of reverse climate denialism and environmental nervous breakdown. And meanwhile, the panels, well, they were becoming scenery, beautiful, modern, but useless, like putting a plasma TV on a cave wall. That's when she went berserk. She showed up with a group of 5 people, all of whom looked like they'd been dragged into the place without really knowing what they were walking into. They had briefcases in their hands, tablets. One of them even wore a suit. Suits. On an island. In the heat, in mud, up to their shins. The woman marched in front of them with the pose of someone about to announce the construction of an airport. They walked around the property for hours, pointing at everything, whispering, taking photos. One of them even slipped on a pile of wet leaves and fell on his butt. The forest seemed to be laughing. And so was I, from my balcony, with a glass of cold juice and the peace of knowing that the earth is on your side. At the end of the afternoon, I received a summons, an official one, a laminated document with a seal, stamp, digital signature, and an entire paragraph explaining that I was being prosecuted. The reason: obstruction of renewable energy production in an extended community responsibility zone. Again, the zone that only exists in her head and on the maps she printed herself. I stared at the paper for a good few minutes. I didn't know whether to tear it up, frame it, or use it to clean the grill, but I decided to keep it, out of respect for the level of insanity. It was art, almost poetry. The woman was trying to legally force me to cut down trees on my own island so that her solar panels would work. It was like someone suing the sky for being cloudy. She claimed that my reforestation directly affected a project of regional environmental collective interest. In her petition, she said that the solar blockade was intentional, hostile, and vindictive. It wasn't wrong, but what makes it illegal? Only if she had rewritten the forest code with the Ra Tim Bum gang. I started to laugh. Really laugh. A laugh of despair mixed with that crazy happiness when everything goes wrong in the right way. I saw myself there, with my feet dirty with dirt, my shirt stained with fertilizer, sued for planting too many trees. I was the Natureba version of an action movie villain. A few days later, a legal team showed up on the island. That's right, lawyers, in suits, with suitcases, wanting to inspect the site. They claimed they needed to document the impact of vegetation on solar production. One of them wore social shoes up to his ankles in mud. Another applied repellent to his face as if it were moisturizer. It was a spectacle. The trees seemed to grow faster, just to scare them. At one point, one of the lawyers turned to me and said, "Are you aware that you're getting in the way of a sustainability project recognized by the HOA?" I remained silent for a few seconds. He looked at me with the face of someone who has never set foot on a trail, but thinks he's an authority on the environment because he saw a documentary on streaming. I planted a tree. Is that a crime now? He remained silent. He lowered his eyes. And the truth is that even he didn't know what he was doing there. It was just another play in his wife's theater. A badly staged play, by the way. The news began to spread. First it was on a local radio station, then on a regional portal. Man sued for planting trees on private island. The headline was so absurd that it became a meme. People sharing, making jokes, saying I was the new green vigilante. There was even a thread on Twitter explaining how to create strategic shade to combat invading panels. The internet fell in love with the story. And what about her? She disappeared for a few days, probably trying to control the damage, or reformulating the process, or perhaps trying to convince some environmental body to take sides. She didn't succeed. Nobody wanted to get involved in an ego war masquerading as solar activism. Not even the most fervent environmentalists, because everyone understood what was happening there. A clueless person trying to take over other people's backyards. It was at this time that I received a visit from a journalist. He was young, curious, and looked like he was looking for the next viral story. He said he had come to see with his own eyes the island that defeated the sun. I laughed. I took him to see the forest. I showed him the fig trees, the vines, the shadows, the birds that had returned. He was enchanted. He said it was like a sanctuary. The story was published under the headline, "The Island That Said No to Imposing Energy." And that's when the tables were turned. Because people started coming. Not the rowdy tourists she used to bring, but people who wanted to learn, understand, and reflect. Forest engineers, environmentalists, students. There was even a group of architects who came to study the harmony between shade and ecological autonomy. What a beautiful name. Meanwhile, the panels were still there, silent, full of leaves on top, branches all around, birds nesting in the structures. One or two still worked, with difficulty, but in general, they had become part of the landscape. They were like monuments to a time when someone believed they could control everything just because they had a clipboard in their hand. And that's when I knew I had won. Not with a shout, not with justice, not with anger, but with patience, with seed, with a branch, with roots. Nature doesn't need to shout to win. It just grows, silent, persistent. And when you try to stop it, it finds another way. It always does. But the woman still had one last cartridge. And when she threw it, the island almost caught fire. Every story needs an ending. But this one didn't end the way anyone expected. The woman, who arrived on my island with 172 solar panels and the look of someone who believed that the world revolved around her own will, decided to take things to the lowest level imaginable. After the flurry of memes, reports, comments, and public jokes about the reverse solar ecocide she was trying to push, the reputation of the HOA she represented went down the drain. The neighboring community, which barely knew the island existed, became divided between those who supported the forest and those who thought it was all an exaggeration. But deep down, most of them were laughing. because there was no way of taking the woman seriously, and it was this loss of control that took the last thread of rationality out of her. I imagined that, at most, she would try a second lawsuit, an open letter, a dramatic appeal in some neighborhood newspaper. But no, the woman chose the path of chaos. One muggy September morning, I noticed that the weather was strange. Not the weather. The other one. The islands. The animals were strange. The birds weren't singing, the lizards were hiding, and even the wind seemed heavier. I walked along the path as I always do, watching the trees grow, watering a few saplings, clearing leaves from the solar panels that were now the ruins of a dead project. That's when I saw something unusual near the base of a fig tree, a small pile of charred branches, ashes, and a subtle smell of burning. My heart stopped for a second. I looked around. No outbreak of fire, no visible smoke, but there were marks, footprints, tire marks, clear signs that someone had been there at night, and someone in a hurry. I ran to the area where the first saplings I planted were. They were still standing, but 3 of them had burnt leaves, as if a flame had licked the tops. It was a dry heat, quick but calculated. Someone wanted to send a message. At the time I thought, she wouldn't have done that. No one in their right mind would set fire to a tropical island in the name of solar energy. But insanity knows no bounds when the ego is bruised, especially an ego driven by administrative councils, condominium meetings, and minute books with reheated coffee. At the end of that day, as the sun was setting and the sky was tinged with burnt orange, ironic, right? I was surprised by a motorized boat approaching the shore. It was her, alone, hair tied up, sunglasses on, and the same useless clipboard as always. She jumped out of the dinghy as if she owned the beach. She walked steadily, without looking around, and stopped 2 meters away from me. Her anger was no longer loud. It had turned into something dense, mute, almost sickly. She took a deep breath and let out the first of only 2 dialogues that day. If you had left the panels alone, this would never have happened. It was like listening to a movie villain justifying the destruction of a city because the hero refused to sign a contract. That wasn't just delirium. It was the soul completely swallowed up by a war that only it was still fighting. I kept quiet, not out of fear, but because words, at that point, would just be another waste of oxygen, and the island was already breathing on its own. She stood there, staring at me. The wind lifted the branches behind me, and the leaves made a soft noise, almost like the applause of people watching a show come to an end. For a second, I thought she was going to explode, scream, spit, but she didn't. She put her head down, turned her back, and went back to the boat without saying another word. All she did was drop a wet piece of paper on the sand before boarding. When I opened it, it was a copy of the latest environmental complaint, handwritten in smudged ink, saying that my forest was an attack on the energy evolution of the region. I laughed, but a sad laugh. That night, it rained, heavy rain, the kind that washes everything away. The island seemed to cry along with it, washing away the ashy marks, erasing any trace of the insanity that had tried to creep in. The next day, I walked the entire terrain. I reinforced the barriers, checked the branches and the nests. Nature was firm, bruised but alive, resilient, and stronger than ever. In the following days, a summons arrived from the town hall, a direct result of the handwritten complaint. They asked for an inspection for alleged forest interference in an alternative energy preservation area. The inspector came by helicopter, landed where the center of the panels used to be, and came down looking like he knew he was there just to clock in. It didn't take him 10 minutes. He looked around, took notes, took a photo of a macaw's nest, and said, before returning to the helicopter, "This should be taken down." Literally. It was the final nail in the coffin of her obsession. The city council dismissed the complaint with a public statement praising the spontaneous reforestation of the island. They even mentioned a possible sustainable visitation project. This made headlines on the same portal that had published the first piece of crap. The headline, "The Island That Saved Itself." And that's when she disappeared. The woman, her name, her ego, her project, her billboards. Everything faded with time. They say she moved to another state, that she now works in a wind energy startup. I don't doubt it. She's probably trying to control the wind now. I, on the other hand, am still here. The island is no longer mine alone. It belongs to nature, the animals, the shadows, of those who understand that not everything needs to be monetized, organized by minutes, or measured by efficiency. Sometimes things just need to grow, spread, take hold, breathe. The panels? They're still here, covered in moss, embraced by fig trees, surrounded by flowers. They've become part of the scenery, silent monuments to a war won without a single shot, only with roots. And if anyone ever asks me how it all began, I'll point to the tallest tree on the island, the one that was born exactly where she had the first panel put up, and say, it was there, where someone thought they were bigger than the sun, and discovered that the shadow also has power. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.